Welcome back to the 40% Better podcast. This episode with Dr. Joey was really fun. We had a bunch of laughs. I had to edit out a bunch of little pieces because we were cracking up about things. It was really a privilege to have him on the show because his focus is workplace culture, having a positive workplace environment to deliver both higher productivity and better revenue, which I'm always a big fan of. So hope you enjoy this episode, and Dr. Joey's contact info will be in the show notes. Work positive is what you want to be looking for if you happen to be Googling Dr. Joey. What's your origin story? How did you get started going down this positive culture path?
I've been entrepreneurial all my life, at least the life that I can remember. As a third grader, I encountered some adversity in my physical health, and so landed on my feet, as it were, and began selling Christmas cards door to door
Oh, wow.
as a 9-year-old, right? So, and I was doing it in August, and I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, so it was 100 degrees with 100% humidity, and I'm showing people my catalog with pictures of snowman, frosty with glitter on him.
Right.
But the cool thing back then, because this was about 100 years ago, the cool thing back then was this was the first wave of inscribed Christmas cards. Now, if you get one that's handwritten, it's a big deal. But back then, inscribed Christmas cards were new. So I learned how to work with people and loving people. And I really grew up watching my grandfather do that, who was a farmer, dairy farmer and tobacco farmer and corn farmer in Eastern North Carolina, because he had families that consistently worked for him and were just like a part of our family, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed how he took care of them, even though they were very different from us. He took care of them, and I saw the way that he cared for them and other people in his community. So that became like the gold standard for me. So when
Right.
I'm selling Christmas cards door to door, I'm taking care of people. And then fast forward on through my teen years, I began a mediocre career in radio broadcasting. But at the time, I was doing really well as a teenager because I had the #1 afternoon drive show in that particular genre in all of Eastern North Carolina. That was 6 months
Wow.
after starting. But what I noticed was that they invested in my training. The company invested in my training. The GM knew me by name, and took the time to teach me things like compounding interest. You know, the old thing about if I gave you a penny today and every day following, would you want that? Or if I gave you $1,000, would you want that? So, he really invested in me. Then I, remaining in radio broadcasting through college, came out and worked for a couple of radio firms that just had the worst culture ever. At least they
Oh.
did at that point in my career. I wasn't used to being called everything but my mother's son, and it not only ignored in terms of what I needed to be a successful broadcaster, but I thought everybody was like Bob Harper, and then I stumbled into this particular culture that I came to call Kevin culture, Bill, because why Kevin culture? Because I was working with a client one day, and she kept going on and on and on and on and on about her boss. I mean, it's true what Sherm says, 57% of us leave a job because of a bad boss, right? So she kept going on and on and on about her boss, and he this, he that, he this, he that. And it was like she didn't want to say his name because she'd have to admit it was real and had all this power over. So I just asked her, well, hey, what's his name so we know who we're referring to? She said, Kevin. And it was like this venom dripping from her voice, right?
Oh
So
my God.
that's how I began to call it Kevin culture. Well, of course, as you and I know, toxic work cultures have been around forever. But it seems like the pandemic really intensified the toxicity of some cultures and yet allowed other persons to lead in ways away from that toxicity. So
Right.
I had begun working with companies to create positive work cultures at that point based on some work I'd done in neuroscience and just understanding people systems and organizational development and organizational psychology and things like that. So during the pandemic, things really, really pivoted one direction or another. I think we're at a pivot point now. So I've taken you from my beginnings up till now. I
Hmm.
think we've also reached another point where this whole RTO movement is happening now with edicts from the White House to Seattle to every place in between, right? If you want
Right.
to work here, you're going to return to the office.
Right.
So we stand at a real crossroads to, do we go back to the model that we think was working well. You know, Will Rogers said things aren't the way they used to be and probably never were. You know, we thought we had better cultures when we were all together physically in a space. Do we go back to that familiar mental model, or do we embrace distributed teams, or as I like to call them, Marco Polo teams, and get out there and discover how to intentionally connect and create positive cultures?
I like that. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, it's yeah, the back to office thing around here, the I know it's happening because traffic,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
to me, that's the metric. Like during COVID, like, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I could go on the freeway and go as fast as I wanted to
Hmm.
because there was nobody on the road, right?
Right.
Nowadays, I could get to Mountain View faster on a bicycle.
I get it. Or a horse.
Or a horse. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that totally makes sense. You mentioned neuroscience.
Yeah.
Um, what talk to me about that? What was the like what got you going down that road and what did you find?
Mm. Well, that dips back into my origin story. I mentioned as a third grader that I had a health issue. Um, I tried to be entrepreneurial and do what every little 9-year-old boy does, and that is borrow dad's lawnmower and go mow grass. Well, what I discovered was I have a severe allergy to mowing grass. I was wearing,
Oh,
so here I go out and do it. It sets up a viral infection in my lungs, and so I wound up at Duke University's hospital for a week. And I remember one particular experience. I was coughing so hard. I mean, literally ribs damaged, muscles, so
oh wow.
fatigued. And I was under, back then, they put you under a tent, a mist tent, and they administered medications like that. Turns out I'm allergic to menthol, which was a commonly used drug back then, not just for cigarettes, but for thank God I never smoked, but for trying to open up the bronchial airways, and I
Right,
was
right.
allergic to it. So there I am, coughing, coughing, coughing. My mom's begging the intern to please, 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 take him off of it, and he would not do that. And so he looks at my mom and says, "We'll wait till Dr. Dees comes around in the morning if he makes it through the night."
Oh,
And so at that moment, I remember my mom reaching under the mist tent, taking my little hand and looking me in the eyes and saying, "Joey, I'm positive you're going to make it through the night." And I received that. I now know it's predictive encoding. I received that. I believe that because someone in authority over me said it. So I took her at her word, and my body reacted accordingly. I did make it through the morning. And by the way, I'm not sure what happened to that intern, but I know the next morning Dr. Dees was not very happy with him. So,
different career path.
Bill, give me just 1 second. I lost my audio. I'm so sorry. Hang on
Yeah,
one
yeah, of
second.
course.
Okay, let's try now.
I'm still hearing you just fine.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know you could hear me. I couldn't hear you. I'm so
Ah, got
sorry. I
it.
apologize for the editing
That's
necessary
okay.
there.
No worries.
Yeah, the
Not a big
power
deal.
blinked around here and knocked my monitors off.
The that intern is currently working in northern Alaska, counting polar bears. That's the job.
Taking blood samples from polar bears.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Wow, that would be the worst job in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really. One of them. Mike Rowe's dirty jobs, right?
exactly.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it was at that point that I discovered as I said, what I know now is predictive encoding, but the relationship between mind, body, and spirit is just so, so strong. And
right.
so I just became intrigued with the brain, and the older I grew, the more concrete I moved away from concrete literal thinking, and as my brain matured, uh, although my wife might disagree with you there, but as my thinking ability to think matured, it really began for me as a teenager. Um, that Bob Harper, the boss of that first radio station, the owner of the first radio station where I had so much success, introduced me to Earl Nightingale
Hmm.
in secret. Um, and so then I listened to that. First of all, I love Nightingale's voice, but I wanted his voice. He was like for me what James Earl Jones became later for me. Um, but just loved his material, and so I was introduced as a teenager then to Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, And I
Hmm.
knew that what he's talking about is both those guys are programming your brain. And so that just led me to W. Clement Stone and Norman Vincent Peale, Power of Positive Thinking. And then that interest just stayed with me as a young man and into middle age. And so the work in positive psychology has been done by, well, I guess Sean Akers popularized a lot of it.
Hmm.
Oprah helped him,
Yep.
but just
Yep.
popularized a lot of it. Really has given me an opportunity to be able to empower people on work teams, and particularly leaders of work teams, to
Right. Right.
understand what I write about in my Work Positive in a Negative World Team Edition book about the perceived core practice and how the brain functions and ways. And we literally train coaches around the world in ICF standards, International Coach Federation core competencies. And so they're certified coaches when they finish our program. And we include a healthy section of neuroscience, believing that behavior can be changed, but it all starts and stops in your mind.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of adapting behavior to get an outcome that you're looking for. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that so part of what I was doing, right? That my partner, like, oh, you're doing blah blah blah, right? Was a bunch of skills based emotional resilience.
Mm,
In the mental health world, there's a stack of skills they use um, in well, nowadays they use it in PTSD, complex PTSD, borderline personality disorder, uh, severe depression and anxiety,
mm,
bipolar, and it's called dialectical behavior therapy, or
mm,
DBT.
hmm.
And DBT is a stack of skills to allow you to self-manage your brain chemistry. Um,
Exactly.
and I got lucky and learned a whole bunch of those skills growing up
Mm,
through sports,
mm,
um, and then applied them in the workplace.
hmm.
And that let me do things that were emotionally uncomfortable. They're scary, right? And I had
Yep.
peers tell me straight up, like, oh, I can't do that thing you just did because it's too scary. And I was thinking, wait a minute, like, we all have the same biology. If I can do it, you can do it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
It's replicable. Hmm.
But what I didn't realize was that I was autopiloting
Mm,
the skills to be able to handle my emotional discomfort
hmm. Hmm.
and breaking it down to little tiny pieces.
Hmm.
And so, rather than jumping on the wild horse, not knowing how to ride,
Hmm.
I started off with a very simple, gentle, docile horse that really liked people, and
Yeah.
then worked my way up, right?
Right.
Rather than
Right.
getting
Yeah.
thrown
We
off.
we call those dead broke.
Dead broke. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, anytime people start talking about neuroscience, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
there's so many different angles on that, right? Like, which direction are
Mhm.
they coming in from?
Yeah.
Um,
It's also
yeah.
very empowering, I think, just helping someone learn about their reticular activating system, and
Hmm.
that the movie that the RAS is playing can be edited, and just
Right.
empowering them to take control of their thoughts or take captive their thoughts and choose well.
Right.
Um,
Right.
wow, the behavior change is huge, and so many popular influencers really do capture that. A Brendan Burchard or an Ed Milet, those guys
Yep.
really bring it to where people can understand.
Right. Right. That the translation and the communication part there is so
Hmm.
important.
Hmm.
My cat wants to be in the video now.
Well, I can go get Maggie May, the yellow lab, and bring her down. We can introduce them if you want. Although Maggie May chases cats, so I'm not sure how that would work
Well,
out.
there's this nice digital separation here. So Maggie would run into the monitor, and we would sit here and go,
Okay.
"That's another
This is
outtake."
virtual reality, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Or
that
is
is
it
awesome.
augmented? Because I'm thinking, maybe
Virtual. Yeah, I'm going to say virtual.
for
Virtual. I'm
this
going to go
for
with
this
virtual.
round, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not wearing glasses, right? So, although for you it might be augmented.
All right, well,
No,
yeah, I can't tell you all my secrets.
those are cool glasses, though. Yeah.
Talk about mine or the augmented,
No,
the AR
yours.
ones.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I like them. Yeah. I normally wear contacts, but I'm not driving yet today, so I don't worry about it.
I gotcha. Yeah, your cat
Yeah.
doesn't seem to mind either. Yeah.
Oh no, the cat doesn't. He thinks he's a dog, you
Ah,
know, and just wants to sit in your lap, and that's kind of his thing. If I
hmm.
sit down, I've got a cat. Um, okay, back to the leadership thing again. Where in the org stack do you focus? Like, who are the people that really get thrilled to hear your stuff, and see, like, and they want to apply it right now?
Well, my ideal client avatar is consists of two groups. One is HR leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is small business owners who find themselves dealing with HR issues and really don't have much of a background. They were, was it Michael Gerber that talked about a technician who had an entrepreneurial seizure? That's
I
typically,
have not heard that story before. That's funny.
yeah, yeah, that's typically the persons who say, there is a plan, we can do this in this way. Um, you gotta have in any organization, you gotta have the buy-in of the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
However, the culture, the positive work culture initiatives typically dam up at mid-level managers,
Right,
and
right,
it's not a reflection on the mid-level managers necessarily, as it is the ability of the C-suite to communicate clearly and
right.
consistently around the culture transformation in which we're engaging. So the first book I wrote, Work Positive in a Negative World, that Entrepreneur Magazine did published for us, um, that was dedicated to the C-suite and to entrepreneurs. The second book that Morgan James Publishing did for us was Work Positive in a Negative World Team Edition because I just kept experiencing that damming up right there and it would all
Sure.
pull up behind it. So how do we empower mid-level managers and the frontline people, the people who are
Right.
actually doing the work? How do we
Exactly.
empower
Yeah.
them to understand, hey, your contribution to the culture is valuable. You're the one who, you know, how do we roll around here? We roll the way that you roll and how you interpret the initiatives. So really focusing on them. I get thrilled by watching those frontliners say, "Hey, I'm empowered now to take control of myself,
Mm-hmm.
that I can lead my team of one." And then the second group I get thrilled with are those mid-level managers who, with just a teaching of some basic coaching skills, we call it work positive manager coach training. Just by teaching some basic coaching skills, they can do what you were doing organically, right? But they can really begin tapping into their teams and releasing the best of the human spirit, which is that creativity and innovation that
Right.
ChatGPT and Claude and all those, they can't hold a candle to what we
Right.
as humans
Right.
can do in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I like that. I'm I've been super focused on the mid-level managers. That's everything I think about.
Mm,
And it's because the founder of the second startup that I worked for,
hmm.
um, he was one day we were talking. He had, this is like 3 months into me running my first team, and uh, I can't remember kind of how we got into the conversation, but there was something I said something of like, I don't have the power to do that, like it's above my pay grade kind of a comment, right? And
Right.
he said, no, wait a minute, you're the most powerful person in the company. And I was like, wait, what?
Wow.
Right?
Awesome.
Like, what are you talking about? And
Yeah.
he goes, your people make everything happen. I'm not writing code. It's your
Mm,
people that are writing the code. And so you have the highest amount of leverage on their productivity. I
mm,
don't.
mm-hmm,
And so whatever you need to help their productivity, if I possibly can, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it for you.
mm,
He said, now, you're doing the technical side of stuff. You're running a software team. James is running the sales team. So I see that sales is the exact same way, right? He has all the leverage. And so I need to make sure that he gets what he needs,
mm,
so that he can get his salespeople to be, optimized. And then
mm,
I can't remember the name of the woman that was running marketing, but he was like, the three of you really are the most powerful people in the company,
mm-hmm.
right? And everything else revolves around helping. And I was like, boink, mind blown. Now what do I do?
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that was one of those lessons that, in the long run, made it easy for me to go to the C-suite and say,
Mm,
uh, we have some friction, in the operation of our team, and it's causing us to waste man hours, and it's wasting your money.
Mm.
If we can get rid of that friction, then the
Hmm.
team can operate faster. You get better ROI. Do you want to
Mm.
hear more?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
invariably, people in the C-suite are like, yes,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
tell me more, right? And so then, I
Right.
lay it out, um, and the vast majority of the time, they said, yeah, I want that thing. Whatever
Mm.
I want you to make that friction go away. How much is it going to cost? Right?
Yeah. Well, if you didn't say anything else, when you said ROI, you had their attention.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing thing. So many people, particularly of our generation, disregard culture in general, what a positive work culture, as woo-woo, when really it's wow wow, because read there are tons of HBR articles. Social scientists have done so much great work around this. You see productivity go up on average 30%. You see
Mm-hmm.
revenue growth go up 28%, operating income up 19%. When
Right.
you do just a few basic things, of course, then you're off to the races, you want to do more, right?
Right.
But
Right.
you do just a few basic things to create that positive work culture, it pays to work positive.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's a couple of years ago, I remember seeing an article, and they were talking about, for every dollar you put into, um, they didn't call it positive work culture. They called it something else, but it was basically having happier employees.
Hmm.
You get back $1.25 in ROI, and I was like, well, like that seems like very logical math to me, and a good investment.
Don't even need a
And
calculator, do you, Bill?
yeah, like I, even with my poor math skills, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
You
you can
know,
take 25% of that, can't you?
yeah, I'm like, okay, we should do that. I'm always amazed when executives don't know that. Like
Yeah,
it's like no one's ever said that to them out loud. Um,
right, right. Well,
and
or they chose not to hear it, Bill, because it's so familiar to use a different set of metrics, right?
right,
And to disregard the human dynamics. Again, I
right,
think that's one of the real positive aspects that came out of the pandemic is that we discovered, or we had the opportunity to discover, some of us anyway, how important culture is and how to communicate that culture and clarify that culture in a way that human beings can enjoy, well, this joy de vivre, this joy of life
right,
expressed through their work. And so work can be meaningful, and it's just a real 180 away from the assembly line mentality, which has continued to capture the
right,
definition of culture today.
right, right. Yeah, the whole assembly line thing. I count myself lucky, knock on wood, but I never actually worked in an assembly line.
I
You know.
have.
Oh, how was it?
um, well, I was 14 and a half, and it was my first public job. In other words, I wasn't selling Christmas cards door to door or pulling tobacco on my grandfather's farm or milking cows. So it was interesting. I've been a student of people all my life, so just observing people and watching how they worked and who are the people who work here and things like this. Um, it was basically an automaton kind of thing. Sure, there were some nuances, but typically those nuances were bad behavior, and you were looking for ways
Oh,
not to do the work, right?
right, right.
And so, you just get shown how to do what it is you're doing, putting hoppers together to go in a peanut combine. That's what I was doing during
Ah,
that
okay.
summer. And so, here's the way you do it, and you do it this way, and you got to hurry up so the next one. Well, that's what the supervisor says.
Right,
The
right.
guys you're working with say, don't get too excited here, because me, I'm competitive. I'm gonna install these hoppers faster than anybody ever has, right? I'm still that way at 65, but anyway, as a 14 and a half year old, I was full of all kinds of testosterone, and so I could really go. And they just literally taught me the culture, which was, son, you got to dial it back. You're
Right,
making us look bad. And I think that kind of assembly line mentality has persisted
right.
long since Henry Ford popularized it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in here in Silicon Valley, people every now and then talk about intrapreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
being an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur inside the business, right?
Absolutely
As
love it.
as as a really effective and smart mental model,
Mm-hmm.
for helping the company to grow and for your own career advancement, and all that stuff. And to me, that seemed like such a such a smart idea and an effective way to approach your career
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always like, why don't they teach that in school? Like
Well, that's a whole nother podcast conversation
whole
about
different,
academia
yeah, yeah,
today.
okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so now we have to do one on regenerative farming, one on, yeah.
I'm telling you, you need to talk to Joel Salatin about regenerative farming.
Oh, we're huge fans of his. We've seen a bunch of his stuff.
Uh,
Um, there's a couple documentaries he's been in.
mm-hmm.
The first one that we saw was, I think, Kiss the Ground.
Mm-hmm. I've
Woody
seen them all.
Harrelson.
He's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me that was a huge eye opener. That
Mm-hmm.
just that whole like, wait, what? Hang on, this completely different from what I've ever been thinking before.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
it's a model flip, that's for sure.
totally. Yeah, totally. And I'm like, especially when he got to the back to the whole executive thing, when he got to the ROI part of making more money per acre with regenerative than he was making previously with the
Mm-hmm.
whole pesticide and fertilizer model.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, you know, kind of like getting your people to operate better with a better culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, well, hello, ROI, like that
Yeah, no.
makes total sense.
Yep.
Um,
That's why I continue to say to anybody who'll listen, it pays to work positive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When What kind of resistance or friction do you get from people when you talk about that in companies?
Yeah, just the thing I mentioned earlier about it being so woo-woo. You live in
Uh,
California, so I don't no disrespect meant, but they just think it's some woo-woo thing that's emerged from Silicon Valley or some
right,
company out there on the California coast. And when you begin to show them that it pays, okay, these are, as my friend Larry Levine, who lives in Thousand Oaks, by the way, when my friend Larry
oh,
Levine talks about soft skills deliver or drive hard dollars, then that moves the conversation in a nice direction. My friend Lindsay Dowd from New York, the city, she likes to avoid the use of soft skills and talk about power skills, which they really are. And particularly when you understand emotional intelligence from my friend Josh Friedman has done such an amazing job with 6seconds.org of just helping us understand the impact that emotional intelligence has,
hmm,
not just to grow better human beings, or as I like to say, you can grow people and profits, right?
right.
Because it's
Oh yeah,
people who are going to grow the profits for you. So
right,
that's what we
right,
talk about in Work Positive Nation all the time is growing people and profits. So the pushback, the friction point that you're asking about is right up here. It's the mental model. It's a familiar
right,
thought, and the inability of some of us to open up our minds to what could be as opposed to what has been.
right,
And typically, those are persons who are leading companies into a death spiral anyway. So, if hopefully there's some equity holders or shareholders that'll figure out, that kind of leadership's not working today, and then disinvite that person from being a leader. But that's the pushback. It's just an unfamiliar thought for so many of us, and for many people my age. And there are
hmm,
some persons younger than me who are still stuck in that traditional kind of model, and they tend to want to then command and control it, and it's just
right,
exert their authority. But it's just basically a longing for the familiar. It's a deep desire with us. You can call the brain lazy or you can call it super efficient. Either way, it's looking for filtering for something familiar that it can put into a file folder up there.
right,
And if I
right.
have to work because here's a new idea, then I want to push back against it and just call it negative and move it out of my path. So that's typically it. So it's not good or bad, right or wrong necessarily. It's just the way the mind works.
Right. Oh, that's so okay. That's interesting. Have you read Scout Mindset?
If I have, I don't remember it today.
So, 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 Scout Mindset. There's a subset of the population. It's like 10%, right? Who are the opposite of what you're talking about.
Oh yeah,
They really want new,
I crave it. Yeah.
right? They need newness. They need stuff that doesn't fit the existing patterns in their
Mm,
heads.
mm-hmm. Mm.
Um, and you get a very different behavior set out of them.
Very different.
They
Very
do
different.
not work assembly lines very well, or if they
At
are,
all.
they're yeah, you need to like find them something else to do. Um, Yeah, I'm always looking. I'm always curious about what those people are doing because I definitely skew in that direction. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Thinking outside the box is a foreign thought because you're not really sure there is a box.
right, right. And for me, it's
What box?
yeah, right. Well, so I know that the box is really what my mental models are, right? Like I know that I can't operate outside my mental models, but I also am always looking for data that indicates there's a mental model available that I haven't run across yet, right?
Yeah, particularly contrarian views, right?
Yeah,
Contraindicators to the typical models.
right.
Hmm.
Joel's whole thing about, can we go back on the regenerative farming again? Joel's whole thing about better ROI doing regenerative than he was getting with the the petroleum based methodologies. Um, for me, it was a whole different was a big mental model shift, right?
Hmm. You got
Um,
excited about it.
yeah, I totally did. And the I tend to think about, and this is one of the things that I do regularly with people is I want to figure out your intrinsic motivation.
Mm.
And so I want to know with everybody on my team, like this, I've inherited a team, right? This is what you've been assigned to do, Joey. But what is it you really want to be doing? And how can we help you within the context of the work that we do, get you more of what you want to be doing and less of what you don't want to be doing? Because
Hmm.
that's hugely productive, right?
Hmm.
And I,
Hmm.
I remember I was at a company where one of the people on my team wanted to change roles and work on a different part of the tech stack. And I went to the CEO to talk to him about it, and that was a tough conversation. And for me,
Well,
it seemed so easy.
why do you want to change it, Bill? It's
Right?
working.
Well, and I want more efficiency out of my people, and when they're intrinsically motivated, they're way more efficient. Um,
Motivation is definitely an inside job. It's almost redundant to say intrinsic motivation because that's the only place motivation
right?
comes
Yeah,
from.
yeah,
And that's the genius of coaching is recognizing that the best resources are within you, or you get to choose where to get them outside of yourself. And so my job as a coach is to ask powerful questions to help raise that awareness so that you then can take action, a new action based on that awareness and find an accountability method that works for you.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, that's finding an intrinsic thing always
Hmm.
to me seemed like a no-brainer. And 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 now what I've learned is I need to make sure that when I talk with an executive about that,
Hmm.
I'm basically framing it in an ROI perspective.
Yeah,
And that makes
exactly.
and the executive then goes, oh, well, of course, that totally makes sense.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But
You
you have to,
know,
you really need to explain that because that's untilled soil right there.
yeah, yeah. And um, what I find is, after a couple, three of those conversations, and then they see the results, the
Hmm.
next time I walk in and I'm like, hey, there's some friction I'd like to get rid of. They're like, okay, the last three worked.
You prove the case.
Right. So
The
what's
unfamiliar had become familiar, and
exactly,
they
yeah.
were
So
thinking
now
that
it's a
direction.
pattern match for them, and also they know I've done my homework,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you come prepared.
And
Well, and the
yeah.
cool thing is when that motivation is connected to Simon Sinek's why, and I
Hmm.
know who I'm working for, why I'm working, and there's a noblesse oblige that's greater than myself, whether it's the company's mission or it's providing a legacy for my family, whatever it is, then that's when the whole thing lifts and you burn 90% of your fuel escaping gravity. And when you reach that point of escaping gravity with that motivation that connects to your why, then
Yeah.
the connection of those daily tasks, particularly with the company mission, and then a clear pathway for how you can accelerate through those and become then more of who it is you want to be, then you're empowered as a human being. And that's
Right.
when the jazz starts happening. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's way cool.
Yeah. And I love that when everybody on the team's excited about what they're doing.
Mm.
Like that's the win.
Yeah. But that requires a redefinition of work that's unfamiliar for so many of us because that whole notion that work can be fun. What do you mean? I owe, so off to work I go. And
Yeah.
so again, just being able to capture the beauty of the human spirit and the mental ability and that competitive advantage of innovation and creativity at that point when there's that neat connection between daily task and who I am and the
Hmm.
connection with a mission greater than myself. That's that's just a foreign thought to a lot of people today. Fortunately, fewer people today, and they're more and
Right.
more as you and I continue our campaign, making
Right.
everything, making teams
Yeah.
40% better, right? As we continue our campaign and just shouting it from the mountaintops.
I
Work
love
can
that.
be fun. In
Yeah.
fact, if my work's not fun, I'm not interested. So no wonder we have Gallup finds 85% disengagement,
Right.
right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the statistics that I feel so sad about, you
Mm.
know, because, you had an experience of working in a radio station where they had a great culture. I had an experience of working in a restaurant in college that
Oh,
had an
sweet.
amazing culture. And,
Nice.
and I was like, on the one hand, I was like, wow, this is phenomenal, right? No one leaves. Like
Mm.
the churn rate at that place was so close to zero as to be unbelievable, right?
Yeah. And I
Um,
bet there was a stack of applications that would make other restaurants envious.
oh yeah, and the challenge was you had to, they had like a 30-day, what did they call it? Not qual like it was 30 days for them to decide if they want to keep you or not, right?
Mm. So they were
That was
auditioning you for 30
they're
days.
they're auditioning you for 30 days, right? And
Uh-huh.
that was the big, like, in all fairness, we had a lot of people come in and not make it. And
Sure.
and typically they didn't make, like, 2 weeks was kind of they didn't even make it that long,
That
right?
was the turn, huh?
That was the turn. And but wow, aside from it being hard to get in the door, the culture was phenomenal.
Mm.
Um,
Well, I
and
would I would say the two were connected because it was hard to get in the door. They had a very
right,
clear sense of who they were, who they wanted to hire, the image they would project into the community, the way they take care of their customers.
right,
And they were perfectly fine saying, hey, this isn't for everyone. You come
yeah.
in, test it out for 2 weeks, and then see what happens.
This has
Okay.
been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um,
I
this has
enjoyed it.
been great. Yeah, I loved it. And yeah, I'm gonna have to get your book and read it and, like, pepper you with questions later.
I love it. I love it. Well, I've written several, so you're welcome to read them all.
Beautiful.
And more are coming. We've got one about to come out, another in the final editing process, and then a third one that's emerging from the cocoon. So
You are just a writing machine.
I am. It's one of my dedications for 2025 is to produce a book a month. So I'm a couple months
What?
behind, but I'll catch up really fast. Yeah,
Okay.
they're just little short books.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yep.
much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a
And
great day.
please send your friends and family and listeners over to workpositive.today. And anything I can do to help you and the 40% Better Tribe, just let me know, Bill.
Will do. Thank you very
All
much. I
right.
appreciate
Take
it.
good care, buddy.
Have a
See
good
ya.
one, Joey.
You
Bye
too,
bye.
man.